And so now we're on to our next item on the program, which is talking about the decade of the CCF. And what I will do first is introduce another film, a film trailer, this is, on the decade of the CCF that's been done with the help of the filmmaker that works with the CCF, Mike, who you'll see around in the hall. And I mention him because this is just a trailer, and the intention is to produce a longer film that will be work with material that's gathered from last night's awards, but also today. So if you do see the camera coming towards you, don't run away. Go towards it and share your highlights, your stories, your thoughts about challenges for the CCF going forward, and get them on the film. So with that, I will introduce the film, yes, and enjoy, and then I'll invite the panel up for a Q&A session.
So I think Climate Challenge Fund is more than just a grant. I think it's also a community of people who genuinely care about Scotland being a world leader when it comes to low carbon lifestyles.
The Climate Challenge Fund has really helped communities across Scotland to try things out, to kind of create something in their own area for their communities, whether it's growing projects, travel projects, energy projects, or waste recycling and so on.
Climate Challenge funding has been transformational for the Ecology Centre. It's allowed us to establish our tool shed as a key component of our volunteering programme here. It's also allowed us to establish a community garden and a local food growing programme which feeds up to 100 people a week.
It's just been a really fantastic opportunity to engage a really diverse range of communities.
The Climate Challenge Fund has really helped us develop as a charity. We're really trying to address those barriers that certain people will have to taking up active travel.
Growing up in the Highlands, the opportunities to become involved in projects which target specifically climate change are very rare. And so Climate Challenge Fund gives these remote communities the opportunity.
It would have been really difficult without CCF, even if the money hasn't come from them directly, but they've put us in touch with other organisations that can help for other aspects of the project. It would have been very difficult to do a lot of the work that we've done.
We wouldn't have the community gardens, we wouldn't have the cycle store, we wouldn't have our high street store which is selling local fruit and vegetables, and all of these are going to leave a legacy in the community once the funding has finished.
Having such a length of funding has really meant that we can really pay attention and listen to members of the community so that we can understand what it is that they need and then be able to deliver it. It really does make sure that you are not just someone that is there for a couple of months and then you're gone again.
It's been really exciting seeing what these groups are doing, but we're starting to see ones that are developing and building their project so that it does have this legacy and it can last when their funding stops.
It's not just helped people in communities to reduce their carbon emissions and become more carbon literate, but it's also encouraged community cohesion and utilise their skills and improve their general confidence in everyday life.
Mostly what we've done with that money is leave people in our community with a sense of agency that they can change things, that they can get a space up and running, and that they can run workshops and keep things going without the funding.
It's a really important time for kind of professional and personal growth. It becomes a lifestyle rather than just your job.
I guess my hope for CCF is that it stays as valued as it is now and can even grow as a resource to make these kind of positive changes that they are making.
Communities have used the fund to move forward in their own way and build their own capacity, which has many, many local benefits for that community. Scotland needs that. We do need more communities to get involved with this kind of work, given the challenges of climate change.
And where communities have ownership of an issue and have ownership of change, which is exactly what Climate Challenge Fund is about, I think that's when great things happen.
Okay, so as I said, that's just the trailer. So be thinking of your own starring shot in the film. So let me introduce our decade of the CCF panel members. These are all people who have been involved with the CCF for more years than probably they'd like to think. So they bring a lot of experience into the panel, and all from different perspectives. So first we have David Gunn, who is now with Zero Waste Scotland, former manager of the CCF. Zarina Ahmed from Semvo, if you'll all come and join me up on the stage here. James Anthony, grant recipient. I think you probably saw him there on the film. Is on the grant recipient working group. Also coordinator of a project at Gate Church. Philip Revel, representing SCAN, Scottish Communities Climate Action Network. And Marie Hay from Nort Energy, all the way from Shetland. Marie? Yeah, there she is. And we've got microphones, and I'm sure you're all ready with your questions, but I will kick off with the first question, and then encourage questions from yourselves. So just an easy one, really, is to share a favorite highlight for you that helps describe the CCF in a nutshell. Favorite highlight. Anybody want to start?
Right, okay, I'll start. For me, the favourite highlight, I've got two.
Okay, two's okay.
Two's okay. The climate festivals. And I think that highlights the power of community groups coming together, working together, the diversity of the community groups, highlighting the good work that comes out of all the projects into a bigger platform and arena where everybody can see what they're doing. I just think it's an amazing atmosphere. So if you haven't been involved in the climate festivals, do get involved because it is just brilliant. And the second one was the young people's event that we did at Dynamic Earth. So it was an event that Julian and I, when Julian Holbrook, who was working at KSB, and we did a young people's event at Dynamic Earth to bring them together to look at what it would be like to be in a UN negotiation situation. And it was looking at different countries, the impact that climate change has on different countries. And it was a brilliant day, and I think it was very educational and inspirational, and Elizabeth was brilliant at chairing it. So yeah, those were my two highlights.
So for me, I think there's many things highlights you could have. 10 years is a long time and a lot of projects. The one that springs to mind is at the gathering, I think it was 2 or maybe 3 years ago, when we had commissioned the Storytelling Centre to work with communities through the summer at the various theme gatherings to pull together a day in the life of a family going about their routine, and they told it in such a way. It was the very start of the gathering, and I've attended quite a few sort of conferences, and they can be quite dry, dull affairs. The gathering is never that, but this one particularly, the way the storytelling interacted with the audience and the communities and reflected back the learning from all the projects, it was just really, really, it said everything about the CCF to me, so it was really, really good.
Mm-hmm. I think for myself, it's been probably the sort of gradual cultural change that is now more and more evident. That I think we had our first grant 5 or 6 years ago, and to think of just the sort of attitudes towards environment and climate change within people you meet on a day-to-day basis, the change that's happened there, and I think that's a collective thing that, 1,000 projects across the country, all doing great stuff, and all interacting with their sort of sphere of community. Collectively, that's resulted in, I think, a great cultural change and sort of helping us get to that new normal, where day-to-day things that used to be normal, we now do in a completely different way that's much more people and planet friendly. So I think just kind of seeing that, and also for projects that have been running for several years, now being in that position where we can kind of show that things work, and we can almost show that it's possible, and then see others go and make similar changes. So it's that kind of cascade effect, I think, that CCF has really started, and I think it's now, because of the length of time and number of projects, the impact of that is really evident.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. Seeing the change, we were involved, we began as a CCF project. We were a local food growing project, and we developed 12 polytunnels in our community, and being in Shetland, they had to be pretty robust. So we couldn't find anything that would be strong enough, so we developed our own. And we, the hoops of the polytunnel, we recycle pipes from the aquaculture industry. So we did our community project, and it was so successful that people were coming forward and saying, where can we buy one of these? So we started selling the polycrop. And I think it, like you were saying, that the interest and the desire to grow food locally and to cut down on food mills and that. And so in the last 10 years, we've sold nearly 400 units of these, and it's all people that want to do their bit to reduce food miles. So it's really good. And I think my real favourite moment is we sold a unit to a fellow with autism. His family had never found anything that interested him, that made him smile, and he was with somebody else. He was tending a friend's polycrop while they were on holiday. He loved it. He absolutely loved it, to the stage that he wanted his own, and now he grows and he has a sensory space in it, and that is my favourite moment, just seeing that difference.
Philip?
Yeah, well, for me personally, I suppose the highlight has got to be when we got the phone call to say we'd had got our first grant from CCF, which enabled us to kickstart a whole range of activity in the community where I live in Dunbar. That, and actually what I think was probably the very first CCF gathering, which in Comrie, where it was really clear that we weren't on our own, we were part of a much bigger community, all working together to bring about change.
Great. Yeah, well, that gives their highlights, and if you take one of these, if you have a highlight to share, please do, or questions for the panel, please start to jump in now, and do share your name and your organization, your community, when you start. Anybody want to kick off? There's one in the corner here.
Hello, we have a question from the Legg Learning Centre in Sutherland. If everyone pledged to do 3 things to help fight climate change, what would they be?
I think as a household, the pledges that we're sort of living out just now are to eat more plant-based food, to not send any plastic to landfill, and that means using things like TerraCycle boxes, because local authorities can't always recycle all plastic yet, and hopefully it is yet. And I think thirdly as well is to move to low carbon transport. So for our next car to be an electric car, we already use renewable energy at home, so it would be charged using renewables as well.
To add to that, then I would, I've forgotten what I was going to say. I'm going to pass it to you now. I'll come back to it.
Just jump in. So for me, it's consumption. I think we all need to think about what we're consuming and how we're consuming it. It's very easy to consume things without even realising it. I've got 2 young and enthusiastic children, and they love stuff, and it's trying to satisfy that demand for experience and for things without creating lots of waste and rubbish that you just have to dispose of. So think carefully about what you're buying and how you're disposing of it. I'm not sure that's 3, but it's what I try and do.
Yeah, that was what I was going to say, was to be conscious consumers. So it's not just about what we buy, is do we need it? where is it bought from, how ethical is, where do we get it from, and it's also about the packaging of what we buy. So it's just about being conscious consumers.
For me, I would say just start talking about climate change, normalize discussion of climate change with family, friends, anybody you meet, and start having honest conversations about what actually gives you a sense of well-being, what is actually important in life, and what's the economy for.
I suppose for me it's indulging my love of charity shops and buying, rather than buying new, whether that be clothes, whether it be furniture, whatever, always go and look to reuse something first, and buy, especially being in Shetland, buying locally. So whatever arrives in Shetland usually has a long journey to get there. So it's to buy locally and support local businesses.
Great, thanks. Questions from here? We've got one there, and then secondly over there. So in blue.
Thank you very much. My name is Narayan Shrestha from Aberdeen Multicultural Centre, and I am the project manager of Climate Challenge Fund projects. I would like to share some experiences that at Aberdeen Multicultural Centre, we started this Climate Challenge Fund project first time in 2015 with Bengali communities, and then we expanded to Afro-Asian communities, the African Asians, and then we started again with Eastern European communities as well. And currently we are expanding it to the Latin American communities as well. So this Climate Challenge Fund has given us so much support to do these climate challenge things, and I think the impact we have seen now is very, very much encouraging. You know, for example, in our communities, we started these cycling projects in 2015, and then we have started now, and we did not have any of these ethnic minority communities, those who were using the bikes, but now we can see almost 17 to 100 people now started using bikes, and which is very encouraging. And at the same time, I think we have increased awareness and we have changed their behaviors for these climate literacy things, and they're beginning to realize how they can reduce the carbon emissions, as well as they can reduce these utility bills, so that both ways they can benefit. So I think we are now expanding all these diverse communities, and which has been very encouraging and most rewarding for us. Thank you.
That's great. Anybody want to comment on that? Really, that's the benefit of this long-term investment over many years, that it's allowed for this sort of norming, making it normal, and projects having the experience and the knowledge, the how-to of the projects and making it work, how that investment is paying off. We had another question in the corner there.
Hi, Prem Singh from Govan Hill Community Development Trust. Having come from a business and marketing and PR background, I've attended quite a lot of different training programs, and including going to the Hare Krishna farm, etc. So I'm learning about climate challenge all the time, but coming from the background I have come from, my question to you guys would be, do you feel that there's been a strong enough media business case for CC Climate Challenge? Because that message about why it makes good business sense that everybody should be doing what we're advocating, I don't think that necessarily is gone out there. The business case, I don't think is as strong as it could be.
The project I've been involved in leading has involved a lot of energy efficiency work to community-owned buildings, as well as installing renewables like solar PV. And for everything that we have done over the last 5 years, we have looked at the business case specifically around those types of things. And that's where Resource Efficient Scotland are excellent. So any SME can, for any resource thing, it doesn't need to be about buildings and energy, it can be about their production of
what they make or their food business, etc. They can do an opportunity assessment that looks at the numbers, both on a financial and on a carbon basis, in terms of what needs to be invested, but what the payback will be, what the return on investment will be. So I think from that perspective, for the business world, where really that is of great importance, that is absolutely there. I think on a community side, it's sometimes more difficult to, measure sort of social outcomes in a business style way. We certainly do measure those as projects, but that's probably more in the reporting side rather than on a sort of public side. But that's just my take on it, I guess.
So I think I understand the question of has there been enough done to sort of demonstrate the need for CCF and what it's achieving, and I think what I would say to that is that the more can be done. I think I've often said to people that the CCF is collectively a really strong story, but often it's told individually. And we only get together once a year, and when you do, you have a great event and you have lots of networking, and videos like we've seen today have been shown. I think that the work of the Climate Challenge Fund in the community should be the Scottish Government's climate change engagement campaign. You've got real stories of real people changing people's behaviour on climate change in a positive way, with lots of great community stories in terms of who's been engaged, young people, old people, different backgrounds, health benefits, food benefits, travel benefits. It's just such a positive story, and we need to figure out how we can share that story on a larger scale to engage people on climate change, because that's what you're all doing on a daily basis at a grassroots level. So that's my tuppence.
Great. Another question. We've got one in the middle and then one in the back. They're in the dark blue shirt. Yeah.
Hi there, my name's Dylan from the Edinburgh College Student Association. One of my questions is, obviously we live in a really good age of data. We've all probably seen tons of graphs showing how our climate is changing and what is causing it. But displaying the information to everybody else is quite a challenge, because some of the numbers you just can't get your head around. What are some ways that you have been able to tell the story of climate change that some people can actually relate to? And have any methods that you've done come as a surprise that they've worked? Or have you had a situation where, okay, this will really hit with the public, and then it's just completely fallen flat?
Was it about telling us?
About communicating climate change when it's such a challenge.
Yeah, I think we were probably lucky in that because we had a food project, people engaged with us for all sorts of reasons, and so we had people that were interested in learning to grow food. We had people that were interested in eating food, and so we could engage them that way, and it was as if sometimes they didn't even realise that they were engaging with climate change issues. But that was really good, and you brought people in that way, and then you could work and then begin the conversations, and after a while then people were engaging with climate change whereas they hadn't done before. And I think that's the importance of the project, is to be able to bring people in a variety of routes and then get your message out in a variety of ways. And we engaged with people that we never ever thought we would, and people of all ages as well. The local food project was a real intergenerational project as well. So you were, it was such a vast range of the community that you were engaging with. So I definitely recommend something like that.
The Scottish Communities Climate Action Network, I think, is less concerned with communicating about climate change and the challenge that poses, and it's more concerned with communicating a positive vision of the opportunities from moving to a post-carbon, community-led future, and really getting people inspired and excited by the positive opportunities that brings for giving a sense of community and enhancing a sense of well-being, rather than, and really creating a positive story about the opportunities, rather than trying to communicate a negative story about doom and gloom.
It's about good facilitation. So it's having that space to have the conversations and creating that space to have open conversations is really important. Never underestimate that people don't want to talk about climate change. That's something that I've learned over the years. If you create the right space, you can have those conversations with anybody. It's making it relevant, making it real, and making it valued as well. So making sure that people, that their voice is valued and what they're saying is really important. But it's also realizing that there's a difference between carbon conversations and climate conversations. Right, so I'm going to be a little bit, devil's advocate here, because I think having the carbon conversations is really difficult. Talking about carbon and carbon outcomes, carbon emissions is a lot harder than talking about climate change. And relating climate change to the weather is always an easy way in.
Okay, thanks. We're getting quite a theme here about communication being both a challenge, but also some really good ideas about how to deal with it. We did have a question in the back, I think.
Hi there, my name's Joshua, oh, that's loud. Joshua Masika from the James Hutton Institute. I'm a research assistant there. I've got a highlight and a question. So I guess the highlight is the fact that my entire career is probably due to the CCF. So I was a student at the University of St Andrews. I was a volunteer at the student community garden there, and in my second year, I'd been slightly skeptical of the local CCF project. I thought they were arguing about recycled printer paper, etc., and not focusing on the right things. In my second year, I got involved in the steering group of that project with a bunch of friends, and we, in my opinion, transformed it, but probably over-egging my role there. And it was a very successful project for 2 years and has continued on to be quite successful. And then I left St Andrews to become a researcher. And I worked with Philip, actually, and many other people on a European research project comparing community-based sustainability initiatives across the EU. And my latest project has been working on an evaluation coming back home now to the CCF, of the CCF itself. So in a way, that's mainly down to the CCF as a thing, has enabled me to chart that career path. The question kind of arises from where my research has taken me, which is, it's a hard question, because we need to kind of consider the possibility that despite all the good that the CCF network has achieved and that all of these projects have managed to achieve and are managing to achieve, there is the very high, in my opinion, likelihood that it may not be enough. And I think that if we want to be strong as a network, as a movement, we need to have some kind of response to the possibility of failure. And the fact that all of these projects, all of this good activity might not be enough to avert climate change. We might still be, it's quite likely that we will be facing severe climate change in my lifetime. So, thanks.
Hey, well, thanks for that note of optimism. No, it's a good question, because many people will say, well, it's a great project, but so what? It's not really changing the world enough out there. But I'm sure that people want to dive in.
It's a good question to put out. Just as I've been to the community garden up at St Andrews, it is tremendous. You should all get up there and have a look at it. It's a real example of a community coming together. I think I would agree. I think that the Climate Challenge Fund on its own is not enough to avert climate change. I think we shouldn't think that it is. There's an awful lot more that needs to be done that we can't control. Communities have a huge amount of influence in their own area within their communities, but we are not able to change the whole system of the way that the Western world and the world is created. What we do have is that influence with politicians, with local businesses, and to demonstrate that action on climate change can be a positive thing and not necessarily a negative thing. Too often, and I remember, I think it was years ago, Alan Brown, standing at the back there, Alan, he did a presentation at Edinburgh University at an ICARB event, and he was talking about why all the charts for climate change are going the wrong way. It's all about cutting and coming down, whereas all the positive things about growth are all going up. And I think that, to me, is something that resonated, and I still think about that, because we shouldn't be trying to sell climate change as a thing that's about going down the way and we're doing less, or cutting things back and having, a reduced quality of life. And what the CCF is demonstrating is that actually you can take action on climate change and improve the quality of life. And that's what I think we need to make more of, to try and get people who are not as interested in climate change as we are to realise that what we're trying to do is create a better country to live in, and that better country will be, by default, lower carbon. And so that's how I would answer that question.
To add to that, I do think that the Climate Challenge funded projects are key in being quite active, and I think the next step for the Climate Challenge Fund is for collaboration. So that's for community groups to come together. So there's lots of great work being done in their own isolated micro communities, but I think now it's time for all of these small community groups to come together and start doing bigger projects, so that they can work together with local authorities to start making a difference, to see to show what can be done. Again, I would reiterate what David's saying, it's about positive climate action. And I think it's time to move away from the term behaviour change. For me, that's got a lot of negative connotations, and we should be looking at positive climate action.
As David said, I think your point is right. By itself, Climate Challenge Fund wouldn't solve the climate crisis, but it's a part of the jigsaw. And the way I've always looked at life is we can do things that are within our control, and certainly as community groups, what we do on this topic, we have a choice to either take positive climate action or not to. And I think everyone's here because they've chosen to take the positive action, and that's absolutely the right choice. I think also, though, the big thing about CCF certainly now is the cascade effect it's having. Our project's now having conversations with local authority, with local businesses, with other community groups who have desire to improve how they do things, and are looking to others who've already done it because they've ran CCF projects. And I think it's that sort of shift, and the reputation that CCF projects now have of delivering real change, that is having a much wider ripple impact than I think is evident if you just look at projects in isolation.
So yeah, as you say, we face an existential threat, and for me, climate change is actually not itself the problem, it's actually the symptom of the economic and political systems which are becoming less and less fit for purpose. And whatever happens, what we really need to cope with whatever comes is to build empowered, resilient communities which can either be in a position to really shape the transformational change that is needed, or at least can provide a sort of hospice for a dying culture. Yeah, Climate Challenge Fund is a very small part of the jigsaw, but we need much wider action to really empower communities to take control over local decisions that are important to them. And that's related to issues around local democracy and land ownership and reform of planning and so on. So, but whatever happens, we're going to need strong communities to support us.
I agree with everything that's been said. The Climate Challenge Fund can be a very important piece of the jigsaw. The Scottish Government has ambitious targets, and I think we need a really wide mix of solutions to try and, be it business, industry, everybody, politicians, has got to get together. When you look at what the Climate Challenge has achieved in the last 10 years, but also you look at the fact that 1.5 degrees is 12 years away, we haven't got much time, and so we need more resources putting into things like the Climate Challenge Fund and all the other solutions, and we need to move quicker, and that's, yeah.
Good. So some interesting thoughts already coming out about, ideas where CCF or where the community movement could go from here, greater collaboration we heard about, but we also heard about using it as a way to tell the story more widely about this positive vision, what life could be like, what it can be like. More questions. Got one at this table here, and then next to her at the next.
Hi, my name is Gillian. I'm from Leith Community Crops and Pots. We run a project this year called Croft Carbon College. It was less of a question, but more actually a highlight when you first asked for highlights, and then actually I've got a couple of points that have been in response to some of the things that have been said. The first was to reiterate the change, I think, in people, in the wider public's perception, and to encourage other climate change funded projects to not give up on the sort of, we don't call it carbon conversations and we don't run it at all like that, but not to give up on that type of climate change conversation, particularly now. So I think we run something called 7 Easy Steps to a Greener You. It's a 7 or 5 week, it depends on the group, workshop. Just drop in, they come in and they participate, they get to know one another, and they have a theme each week that they talk about. And we don't shy away from saying home energy, active travel. We do actually talk about that. And people really, really have come. I mean, we've completely, I know even CCF was sceptical about it working because of the carbon conversation thing, but we're completely inundated now. And they aren't, necessarily young people or climate activists or all that aware. Some of them do know some aspects, but they're learning a huge amount. And actually, whilst a lot of projects in Climate Challenge Fund are funded for communities who have got diverse and difficult needs and backgrounds and things, actually I think we shouldn't shy away from the fact that some of the people that come to our workshops in Leith are actually semi-affluent or are capable, but they're causing a huge amount of climate emissions. They're actually much more contributing to climate change than many of the other communities, and to not shy away from those people that can make those changes. So that was one of the things I was going to say. The other was that we use social media and we don't shy away from doing something a bit different. So doing a fermentation workshop because people can reuse glass jars and being much more creative. And the Climate Challenge Fund has allowed us to do that where other projects wouldn't. And I think that's something that's been fantastic. And is to think outside the box. And it's been lovely to see some other projects doing that a little bit and don't go with the norm. So yes, don't call it carbon conversations and maybe rehash it substantially because it's majorly out of date, but don't shy away from that, because in Leith, the people that have been coming to us are not who you'd expect. And they've learned a lot and they've got to know one another, and the social benefit from that has been brilliant. And the other thing was just to highlight collaboration. We're funded to work with other organisations and to work with social enterprises to deliver some of our workshops, and to maybe think about that as well, about bringing other groups in that have expertise in areas that you don't, and actually instead of trying to do the same thing they're doing, particularly in urban areas, is to work with them directly and enable them to come into your community. And we've seen the massive benefits in that. And I'd say one of the big things that we have to look at when we're thinking about businesses, and also talking about capitalising on Climate Challenge Fund, is to be more encourage more enterprising and more social enterprises and businesses to think more on that side, and CCF projects to develop more into that area. And we've been really grateful to CCF to enable us to work in an enterprising manner. It's one of the very few funds that allow you to do that. But I think there's a real shift that social enterprises can offer in terms of environmental change that we should tap into more.
Anyone want to comment on? No?
Just very briefly, when talking about highlights, and when you said you're from Leith Crops and Pots, one of the highlights for me was when I first met Evie, and when she started up the project, and it was just her and her family, and then it grew. And that's just one of many stories that I've in my head, and I've been away from CCF for about 3 months, and coming back here, you start to have flashbacks about all these different projects, and there's so many. So it's nice just to have that memory of it, so thank you.
Great, yeah, that is I think, the variety, that each project is different in how it started, and that grassroots strong rooting in the community is so unique to CCF. Now, oh yeah, that's right, there we go.
Hello, my name is Jane. I'm from the Leg Learning Centre, a long way away from here. My question is quite hard for the panel. Can you name and shame any group, organisation, political or otherwise, any person's type of character that you'd like to strangle, basically?
Did you catch the full question? You did back there, but I didn't catch the end of your question. Oh, that you'd like to strangle. Well, who wants to answer that? They're all looking a bit reluctant.
A difficult question, hey? I think the event in Poland this month, it was kind of disheartening to read in the press that there were some countries had showed up and decided not to accept the IPCC's report or not to welcome it. And there were others that sort of stayed silent on the issue. And I think what we need is we need people to lead, and we need people to take the action to avert the crisis. And I don't know who the individuals were who were involved in those discussions, but that's something that I think everyone else in the world looks on and goes, "Oh, really?" So that's my answer to your great question.
Okay, I'm probably going to bring it a lot more local than that. For me, it's about, I'm not going to name any particular projects, but there are projects out there that lie about meeting their targets. And I would just like to say, please don't lie, because even if you don't meet your targets, there's learning in that, and that learning is so valuable. And people like Scottish Government who have the fund need to hear the challenges. So if everything's running smoothly and everybody meets all their targets, they think that we don't have a problem, we don't have issues. The Climate Challenge Fund doesn't need to be reevaluated, doesn't need to be reviewed. But there are challenges, and we need to acknowledge those challenges and be open about them. And so we need to hear when targets aren't being met or when something's not feeling. Because A, there's support out there, and B, we need to know what to do to help other people as well.
Okay, I think they're all going to keep their strangling thoughts to themselves. We've got many questions all along the back there, and also one here at the front. So I think we'll have time to take them. So right at the back, woman there in the back. And then we'll work our way along to my left, and then take you there.
Hi, my name is Fatma. I'm from Green Guardians, based in Glasgow. It's my third project with CCF, and I would just like to highlight and recognize the support. I've worked with Zarina personally, and just adding on to her point, that really appreciate the openness, the atmosphere, the CCF community. I've never felt alone as a project manager. The support we get, the environment of not being judged. You can just talk freely that this is not working, this is not helping me, and the help has been incredible through our officers, through the staff. The SEMVO, the KSB, and the CCF staff has been amazing, and that just gives us the positive vibe to go with confidence. Because a lot of things we are saying to them are they have to change their ways, their habits, and that's not something very easy to do, especially with older generation. But it feels amazing to be recognized in that context. So I just wanted to highlight that. The other thing, I attended the last CCF gathering, and every second person was saying that if the projects were for 2 years, we would be able to make a better impact. So when we heard about the 2-year funding, it was like we were heard. So really appreciate that for doing that, and it feels like it's part of a family and you can discuss outspokenly everything. So thanks a lot for that.
Thank you. That's very positive and great to have that feedback. Next along, there was someone in the back.
Yeah, good morning. I would also like to acknowledge the support my name is Adil Ibrahim and I work for the Welcoming Association in Edinburgh. I would like to acknowledge the support that we got from SEMVO Scotland and Keep Scotland Beautiful. Without your support, we wouldn't have been successful in gaining CCF funding. My question is about climate justice. It's an area that's very close to my heart, and I actually came across it during a workshop run by Zarina and Keep Scotland Beautiful. With climate justice or injustice, where the industrialized countries contribute the most of the CO2 emission, while poorer countries contribute least, but they suffer the most. So I guess my question, what's the CCF view on this subject? Can we move a little bit from working with local communities to look at the global picture? What's your views in general in terms of the subject of global climate injustice?
It's always good to get your response in first and then pass it down the line. But I think one of the other highlights and successes of the fund has been the engagement with SEMVO's help with minority communities, and that we have a very diverse range of communities that are getting support from the CCF. What I've always felt was one of the great benefits was the connections that these communities have to countries that are being impacted right now with fairly significant impacts of climate change. And I think we should try and tell those stories and share them amongst communities in Scotland where they haven't got that direct experience, and use that as a motivation for action. Because, there's one thing for sure, is if you can see the change and you can see people being affected by climate change impacts, then you're more likely, I think, to change your behaviour and take the issue more seriously. So I think that's where I think CCF can work and gain some valuable resources through these diverse communities.
For me, it was an easy conversation to have about climate justice, because working with all the different diverse communities that have those connections in the world, I was hearing the stories every day from community groups about the impact in other parts of the world. And then working on climate change for nearly 10 years, one of the things that I saw in the Scottish communities was that there wasn't this conversation around global issues. It was all about what's happening in Scotland, as if Scotland lives in a bubble, and that really frustrated me. So I think it was really important to start having those conversations about climate injustice. Going forward, what I would love to see is for community action to be community action from Scotland communities working with communities in other parts of the world. Just to have that learning and sharing skills, sharing knowledge between the two countries, the two communities is really important. And I highlight the fact that I say communities and not countries, because I don't think it is about government to government. I think it's about community to community, people to people.
There's a brilliant map on the CCF website in the resources section. It's used in the carbon literacy training, and it's a map of the world, and it shows the countries not sized as we'd normally see them, but sized on the amount of emissions that the amount of carbon emissions that they contribute. The second map shows countries sized based on the impact on life from climate change. And it's an incredibly motivating picture to look at, because the Western world essentially takes up most of that map on emissions, and on the second one, the Western world is virtually invisible because it's so small in terms of the really terrible impacts that people unfortunately are going to face from from climate. So I think when you show that to people, it kind of hits home that it's actually not fair to live in a way that hurts someone else at the other side of the world. And I think when we think of that from a moral perspective, it really emboldens the case for taking action and doing things differently and having a new normal. So for me, that's a big personal motivator.
Climate justice is a big personal motivator for me as well, having lived and worked with peasant farmers in Zimbabwe a number of years ago. And for me, that really highlights the particular responsibility that Scotland has, actually, because as sort of the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, we've got a very long legacy of carbon emissions, and we long ago used up our allocation of the global carbon budget.
Sorry, I've got a request from Claire Hamilton from the Scottish Government to say a word.
Thanks, Elizabeth. My name is Claire Hamilton. I'm Deputy Director for Decarbonisation at the Scottish Government. So my team is responsible for the Climate Challenge Fund, but also for the Scottish Government's Climate Justice Fund. And the Climate Justice Fund is something that we've had now for a number of years. Scotland is quite unique in having a fund of this nature. It provides funding for projects in Malawi, Rwanda, and Zambia. And the new part of the Climate Justice Fund that just started last year is modelled on the Climate Challenge Fund. So we're looking very much at working directly with communities rather than that government-to-government support to get the on-the-ground action that is needed, and to also take some of the lessons that we've learned from the Climate Challenge Fund to other countries to help them adapt to climate change as well. Thank you.
Thanks. That's an interesting opportunity for people to know about. Sarita wants to add.
Yeah. Okay, it was just to say that it's great having the Climate Justice Fund, but it would be great if it was extended to a lot more countries.
Okay, and we've got a question over here. I guess I have to lose my microphone.
Thanks. It's really a response to Claire and picking up the point that David was making. I'm Bruce Robertson, one of the trustees of KSB. And, you know, over a decade, it's been an absolute privilege for us to help administer the fund and support the groups right across Scotland. We do try to weave in the lessons we learned through the Climate Challenge Fund with the other programmes that we run. And to pick up on your point, Claire, I recently spoke to a group of Chinese head teachers over in Beijing. And in the new year, we're going to take our Climate Ready Classroom project to schools right across China. That's a good example of what the contributors have been saying today, because it is about communities, but it's also about governments as well. And we did hear a very, very important speech today about the significant Scottish Government places in this, and I think there's a lot of learning we can take from this to other countries. So it was just to really say to the audience here, thanks very much from KSB for everything that you're doing in your communities, and we do try and take the lessons that you give us and weave them through all the various programmes that Keep Scotland Beautiful actually lead. So thanks, and thanks to you for doing this for the last decade.
Okay, now I'm afraid we're, as they say on the news, we're going to have to leave it there. But I'm going to have chair's privilege and ask my panel one last question. They have to be very quick fire answers, so not long, very short. And the question is, if you had one message for the minister before she left today about the CCF or for the CCF's future, other than more money, let's assume you would say that, what would it be? Who wants to start? David.
So I think for me, what I would be suggesting is that we find a way to harness the commitment, innovation and collaboration that exists across the CCF and sustain and enhance that for the next 10 years. I think you've got a platform here to build from that is very, very significant. It's an important part of the jigsaw. We've talked about that. We need to think about how we can make more of the collective talents and expertise that's in the fund.
So talking about the collective talent for me is acknowledging the people behind the projects. So I think there's a lot of emphasis about the projects and project outcomes, but that doesn't happen without the staff, the volunteers. That's where the passion lies, that's where the change lies. So I think it's about harnessing, recognising and supporting the people behind the projects.
I think my message would be that we still look around us on a day-to-day basis and see things in our local businesses, national businesses, travel, transport, that we know there are easy solutions to. Like we know that packet of bananas doesn't need to be in a plastic wrapper, stuff like that. And I know that there's legislation that's going to change all that. But I think part of what CCF projects do is they solve problems and they find solutions to do things in a better way that's friendly for the planet. So finding some way to harness that knowledge and that approach wider than just the sort of voluntary sector that we're a part of, so that actually CCF projects can impact local government, local business, and the sort of wider community. That would be my take.
My message for the CCF really would be that actually the projects with the most transformational potential may save very little carbon, if any, in the short term. So there should be much less emphasis on short-term carbon saving and much more emphasis on building community and creating the fertile ground from which transformational change can really arise.
I don't think I can add anything to that. Yeah, I think it's about people and communities and working together and being able to have a space to do that. And CCF provides that and needs to continue to provide that.
All right, well, there's excellent contributions there. I hope we'll record those and make sure the messages get through. But lots more, I'm sure, thoughts that are out there. So do keep tweeting them, sharing them amongst yourselves, chatting about, what should the next decade look like for the communities and for the CCF fund. I like the phrase about, don't underestimate that people want to talk about climate change. You have more experience with that than most people do. So do encourage others to have those conversations, and do think about collaborations that are possible and that cascade effect. So with that, I just want to thank very much our panel. I think they've been very brave to come up, take all the questions, and do chat with them as well over the break. They've got a lot of experience amongst them. So thank you very much. But I do have to ask David Gunn to stay back, please. He hasn't been bad, don't worry. But we do want to recognize that he has a decade of the CCF as well. David, as many of you know, he's manager of the CCF from its outset in 2008. He showed extraordinary leadership, I'd say quite exemplary textbook-style leadership, coaching his team, working closely with the Scottish Government, supporting the grants panel, and always listening and hearing what community groups wanted and needed. David was never afraid of change. Indeed, he saw it as essential for the CCF to evolve along with the communities that it was supporting. So, David, here in this room, And beyond to those who couldn't make it or those that are on the live stream, this is your CCF family. And they want to give you an award to recognize your outstanding contribution to community action on climate change over the last decade through your role as manager of the Scottish Government's Climate Challenge Fund. And I'll get the award. I don't know if you want to say a couple of words, or have you had enough already? Just a few.
It would be very rude not to say thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you to everybody in the room and not in the room for that. A lot of the time, last night at the awards ceremony, people were saying I haven't got a speech. I genuinely didn't think this would be happening. So thank you very much. And it's been it was a real pleasure to spend 10 years working on the Climate Challenge Fund. And when I think back to the early days when it was a blank sheet of paper and what we could do and what's happened in that 10 years, I think it's been great to be part of that. And I really wish everybody all the best for the next 10 years, and I will hopefully be able to stay aware of it and keep involved in some way. So thank you all, and hope you have a great day. Cheers.